Hi folks, this is James from Fairy Tales, Myths and Legends. This time we're looking at the Minotaur from Greek myth. I hope you enjoy this one. The Minotaur, a figure as tragic as it is terrifying. One of mythology's most splendidly grotesque concoctions. A beast neither wholly man nor entirely bull, but rather an alarming and altogether unsettling hybrid of the two. Classical sources, being what they are, wonderfully contradictory, generally agree that this infamous creature possessed the powerful muscular body of a man coupled with the bellowing horned head of a bull. However, some more contrarian accounts insist upon the inverse, the human head in all its fragility perched precariously atop the mighty bulk of an ox. Either way, it's safe to say that the Minotaur was an abomination, an affront to the natural order, a nightmare-given flesh, and perhaps most cruelly of all, a prisoner of its own existence. Now, how did such an improbable creature come to be? Well, for that we must thank the ever-capricious gods and the deliciously scandalous tangle of hubris, lust, and divine punishment that constitutes Greek mythology. Enter Minos, the powerful king of Crete, a ruler whose influence extended across the Aegean. At some point in his reign, Poseidon, the formidable and often petulant god of the sea, gifted Minos a truly magnificent bull, snow white, regal, a beast fit for the gods themselves. The intention was clear. Minos was to sacrifice this divine specimen in Poseidon's honour. But Minos, overcome by vanity or perhaps a peculiar bovine admiration, decided against it. Instead, he cunningly substituted a far less impressive bull for the sacrifice, keeping the dazzling divine one for himself. A grave error. If there is one thing Greek gods do not take lightly, it is disrespect, particularly when it's laced with deception. Poseidon, not one to tolerate such impudence, devised a punishment so audaciously inventive that one can only admire the mythological imagination at work. He afflicted Minos' wife, the unfortunate Queen Pasiphae, with an overwhelming, all-consuming, utterly unnatural desire for the very bull her husband had refused to sacrifice. Now, while most of us, when afflicted with an unwise romantic inclination, might sigh, swoon, or perhaps write some embarrassing poetry, Pasaphe was a woman of action. Desperate to consummate her unnatural yearnings, she turned to none other than Daedalus, the great Greek inventor, whose brilliance was matched only by his apparent lack of ethical boundaries. At her request, and with his usual ingenious flair, he constructed a hollow wooden cow, complete with lifelike hide, into which Pasaphe could climb and, well, achieve her rather disturbing aims. The plan worked. From this most unholy union was born Asterion, the Minotaur. Pasaphe, ever the devoted mother, attempted to raise her monstrous offspring as one might any other child, though one imagines playdates might have been somewhat of a challenge. Alas, despite her best efforts, the Minotaur proved to be a savage, insatiable beast. With each passing year, his appetite for human flesh became more apparent, more terrifying, more impossible to ignore. And so, Minos, unwilling to kill the creature outright, he was after all the result of divine punishment, turned once more to his ever-reliable engineer, Daedalus. The solution? The labyrinth. An immense, sprawling maze of such unfathomable complexity that escape was all but impossible. Into this inescapable prison the Minotaur was cast, doomed to prowl its endless corridors in solitude and hunger. But mythology does love a hero, does it not? Enter Theseus, Prince of Athens, brave, bold, and not entirely without self-regard. The Athenians, you see, had become entangled in Minos' wrath after the death of his son, Androgeus, whom he blamed upon their people. In retribution, Minos demanded a ghastly tribute. Every 9 years, Athens was to send 14 of its finest youths, 7 men, 7 women, to Crete, where they would be sacrificed to the Minotaur in the depths of the labyrinth. Twice already had these young souls been sent to their doom, and when the third cycle came due, Theseus stepped forward, volunteering himself to be among them. though with rather a different intention. He planned not to die, but to kill the beast and end the cycle of horror. But love has a way of intervening in these matters, and intervene it did. Ariadne, daughter of Minos, took one look at Theseus, and as Greek myth often dictates, promptly fell in love. Determined to aid him, she turned, as one always should in moments of labyrinth-related crisis, to Daedalus. Ever the purveyor of cunning solutions, he provided a simple but effective plan: a ball of string. As Theseus ventured into the labyrinth's shadowy depths, he unwound the string behind him, creating a path he could follow back to safety. At the heart of the maze he found the Minotaur, sleeping no less. Armed with his father's sword, he fell upon the beast, slaying it in a violent and climactic struggle. Then, retracing his steps via the string, he emerged victorious. With Ariadne at his side, he fled Crete, having broken the grim cycle of human sacrifice. And yet, as with all Greek myths, the tale does not end in unblemished triumph. Minos, enraged by Theseus' escape, and more specifically by Daedalus' role in it, turned his vengeance upon the inventor. Daedalus and his son Icarus were imprisoned within the very labyrinth he designed. But Daedalus, being Daedalus, devised a final, miraculous escape, fashioning wings from feathers and wax. You know the rest. Icarus, caught up in the sheer exhilaration of flight, soared too close to the sun. The wax melted, the wings failed, and down he plunged into the sea. A tragic, poetic lesson in the perils of hubris. Yet the Minotaur's tale endured. It has been recounted and reshaped and reimagined for millennia. Homer, in his great Iliad, makes mention of Minos, Ariadne, and Theseus, but curiously omits the Minotaur and the labyrinth. Herodotus, that pioneering historian of the 5th century BC, speaks of a labyrinth, though he places it not in Crete, but in Egypt, in the city of Crocodilopolis. It was later writers, such as Roman Pliny the Elder, who firmly established the labyrinth at Knossos. And what of its ruins? The palace at Knossos fell into abandonment following an earthquake or deliberate destruction around 1350 BC. Yet its legend lived on. In the 15th century, a Florentine priest named Cristoforo Buondelmonte stumbled upon underground passages at Gorton, proclaiming them to be the labyrinth of Minos. Centuries later, Captain Thomas Sprat, surely a name straight out of an adventure novel, surveyed the area and concurred, describing the site as unquestionably a real labyrinth, such as the ancients understood by that term. Then, in 1878, a local businessman with the serendipitous name of Minos Kylokyrinos unearthed ruins at Kefala Hill, identifying them as the remains of Knossos itself. Enter Sir Arthur Evans, one of those splendidly tweedy, moustache-twirling gentlemen of archaeology who strode across history with a confident, if occasionally misguided sense of purpose. Imagine, if you will, the year 1900. Evans, wide-eyed and brimming with scholarly enthusiasm, sets foot in Crete and declares, "Right then, let's see what treasures lie beneath this sun-kissed soil." And treasures he found, oh my, in abundance. There, beneath the dust of millennia, lay Knossos, a palace of labyrinthine corridors, grand halls, and exquisite frescoes. Evans had, as it were, struck historical gold. But here is where it gets a bit dicey. You see, Evans wasn't content with merely digging up the past, oh no, he wanted to bring it to life. So rather than leaving Knossos as it was, he took a paintbrush, metaphorically, though sometimes quite literally, and decided to restore it. And by restore I mean enthusiastically slap on some concrete, add a few columns where he thought they might have been, and perhaps improvise a little with the frescoes. Details, after all, can be so frightfully inconvenient when one is reconstructing an entire civilization. And then there's Evans' whimsical vision of the Minoans, who apparently spent their time frolicking in idyllic harmony. A lovely thought, except that modern archaeology has found a few pesky things like weapons, fortifications, and signs of conflict, suggesting the Minoans were a touch more complicated. But did Evans let that ruin his dream? Not a chance. He was in many ways a storyteller first and an archaeologist second, and therein lies the problems. So what are we left with? Knossos today is a half-ancient wonder, half Evans' personal playground. a place where history and fantasy collide in the most peculiar way. A gift to the world certainly, but one wrapped in a fair bit of Victorian imagination and a dash of good old-fashioned British imperial confidence. One can't help but admire the audacity, even if we scratch our heads and wonder just how much of Knossos is really Minoan and how much is simply Evans having a rather extravagant artistic moment. Did Evans think there was a real flesh and blood Minotaur stomping about? Not quite. He was far too charmingly rational for that. Instead he saw the myth as a garbled Greek memory of Minoan religious practices, perhaps initiations, sacrifices, or just a bit too much wine-fueled storytelling around the Aegean campfire. Of course, in true Evans fashion, he took his theory and ran with it like Theseus himself, weaving a tale as enthralling as it is speculative. Was he right? Was he wrong? A bit of both probably, but by Zeus, wasn't it all rather fun? The myth of the Minotaur continues to this day, having made the journey from the sunlit shores of ancient Crete to the flickering screens of modern pop culture. This half-man, half-bull has never quite retired from the limelight. Take for instance Percy Jackson and the Olympians, where the Minotaur charges both literally and figuratively into the lightning thief, maintaining its fearsome status in the pantheon of mythological menaces. Meanwhile, in the illustrated realms of Marvel and DC Comics, the beast is reborn in various guises. Cinema too has found itself bewitched by the Minotaur's aura of menace. In Pan's Labyrinth, the director conjures the chilling figure of the Pale Man, a ghastly echo of the Minotaur's unnerving presence, embodying themes of oppression and dread. Meanwhile, American Horror Story Coven reimagines the creature as a tragic cursed servant, intertwining mythology with the grotesque. And of course, no discussion of modern Minotaurs would be complete without a nod to the fantastical battlefields of gaming, where titles like the Elder Scrolls and Dungeons and Dragons revel in the creature's innate ferocity, casting it as a formidable warrior lurking in dungeons and shadowy forests. So was the labyrinth ever real? Was the Minotaur a distorted memory of history or pure mythological invention? We may never know, but the legend, like the labyrinth itself, remains winding, twisting, and utterly inescapable.
Have you got something to say about the Minotaur? Have we missed something important? Have you got a suggestion for another topic? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe, as it helps us fund the channel. This has been James from Fairy Tales, Myths and Legends. I hope to see you again soon.